In 1789, during the Russia-Turkey War, Russian forces captured the port city of Odesa. Back then it was known as Kajibey. The Russians gained formal control of this port in 1792 under the Treaty of Jassy. In 1794, the port of Odesa was established as a fortress for the Imperial Russian Navy and given its new name. The Russian port of Odesa was a success. From 1819 until 1859, the port of Odesa was a free port. It attracted many different nationalities to trade via this busy channel. In addition to Ukrainians, the population of Odesa included Russians, Poles, Greeks, Germans, and French. In fact, the Russian poet Alexander Pushkin, who lived there in exile back in 1823, he wrote about the port of Odesa as a more European city where French was spoken and European newspapers and magazines were freely available. Today, more than 200 years later, and ever since this war began between Russia and Ukraine, one key city in Vladimir Putin's calculation has been Odesa. Western officials believe that Russia will likely begin a major offensive to retake Odesa. And the proof of that is in the recent missile strike that happened on the port city. And that too, within 24 hours of signing a major food grain export deal with Ukraine. On Crux DeCode, why does Vladimir Putin want Odesa so badly? Odesa, a warm water port, one of the few in this part of the world, was historically known as the Pearl of the Black Sea. It is a critical transit hub for Ukraine's grain exports. About a sixth of all global corn supply and about an eighth of all global wheat supplies come from Ukraine, and much of it passes through the port of Odesa. If Russian forces were to take Odesa, that would be a devastating blow to Ukraine. Moscow gets a greater stranglehold over critical global food supplies, which anyway have been dwindling since this war began. So what this essentially means is that the Western powers, the United States, its NATO partners, have their work cut out. They need to continue to keep giving the Ukrainians critical weapons, but also fresh training. Moscow's record so far has been pretty patchy when it comes to holding port cities like Odesa and Mariupol. In fact, it had control over Odesa briefly in the early days of the war, but it's been recaptured by the Ukrainian forces. Mariupol, in fact, saw a standoff for a number of weeks at one particular steel plant. It took several weeks before Russia was able to run over the city. So it is far from certain that Russia could overrun Odesa, even if it is a big priority for its president. Now, one advantage that Ukraine will have is that while it loses ground in the east, both in Donetsk and in Luhansk, it will give Ukraine time to fortify its defenses in the south. So it's not going to be like Russia can just waltz in and take over the port city. Also, the Russian Navy's record at offensive takeovers has been rather patchy. Just take a look at what happened at Snake Island. Naval warfare is a different kettle of fish. Excuse the pun. Russia's new war aims come even as the White House has issued a new set of warnings over Russia's plans to annex territory not just in eastern Ukraine, but also in the south. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, in fact, had recently said that Russia's military goals in Ukraine were no longer focused just in the Donbass. Now, that was interpreted as a sign that Russia could again widen the offensive. The US National Security Council spokesperson recently said that Russia is laying the groundwork to annex Ukrainian territory, which includes Kherson, Odessa, Zaporizhia, and of course, in addition to Luhansk and Donetsk. The fighting between Russian and Ukrainian forces in the Donbass has bogged down into a stalemate. Ukrainian troops are hardening their defensive positions after losing most of Luhansk. Russian troops are making a renewed push into Donetsk. Despite Moscow's current focus on the Donbass, both US and European officials believe that the Kremlin has its sights on Odesa as a major strategic prize. Western officials say that Putin wants to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. He needs this northern port city. He wants a sea corridor directly to the Russian border, a place called Transnistria. It's a narrow, Russian-backed breakaway province in Moldova. It's on the border with Ukraine. But there's a catch for Putin. He will not be able to undertake any offensive against Odesa until after the Russian troops completely capture the Donbass. And even then, even after they manage to capture Donbass, Russia will still struggle to mobilize more troops. Russia, in fact, had tried to encircle the port city from 3 sides early in the war, but it was unable to reach the city by land. If Russia were to snatch up a bit of Ukraine's south and west, like Odesa, for its strategic reasons, that would be a big blow for Ukraine. A capture of Odesa would cut off Ukraine from the rest of the Black Sea. It would render Ukraine as a completely landlocked country. The concerns over another major offensive comes even as Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish and UN officials met just last week and clinched a deal which allowed Kiev to restart exports of grain through the Black Sea. In fact, more than 20 million tons of food is stranded in the waterway. That is almost 4 months of supplies that can feed the entire world. And guess what happened after this limited deal was signed? Within 24 hours of this deal, even before the ink on the paper could be dry, Vladimir Putin ordered a major hit on Odesa. It drew widespread condemnation both from the US as well as from Europe. It once again, they said, was proof of how Vladimir Putin cannot be trusted. Russia's attack, which has left this deal stuttering, would also leave some of the world's most populous countries that are dependent on Ukraine for grain, like Bangladesh, Egypt, and Pakistan, in dire straits. The West has also examined options to move Ukrainian grain out of the country by rail, including shipping it all the way to the Danube River in continental Europe. But the volumes would not keep pace. Russia is benefiting from higher grain prices, but it's also facing pressure from countries in the south, like Egypt, which relies on Ukraine for more than 80% of its wheat. The Kremlin has already made some of its most strategically important gains of the war by cutting Ukrainian troops off from key waterways. Russia, in fact, took over Mariupol, a major Ukrainian port on the Sea of Azov, back in May. But in the process, they had to kill about 20,000 people. It also took the nearby port of Berdyansk along the way. In fact, Russia has been controlling the biggest port in the region, Sevastopol. It's in Crimea, since Russia invaded Crimea in 2014. Now, the shutdowns have also put an economic drubbing on Ukraine, with the World Bank predicting that GDP in the country will decline by 45% this year. But Ukraine has also responded. It has retaken the Snake Island in the Black Sea by repeatedly using Western-provided Harpoon anti-ship missiles. The Pentagon believes that would give Ukraine an advantage in a potential assault on Odesa. Ukrainian military officials, who are concerned that a longer war could actually end up favoring Russia, they have been rapidly preparing for a counter-offensive that's lightning in nature. They want to retake Kherson before the snow sets in. But Kiev was also concerned that it lacks enough firepower to get the job done. The United States also says it plans to send 4 more high-mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, to Ukraine as part of the latest package. All said and done, if Vladimir Putin and the Russian forces were to take over Odesa, that would be a body blow, not just to Ukraine's territorial and sovereign ambitions, but also, more importantly, to its economic ambitions. It loses any direct access to the Black Sea, and thereby its entire economy, particularly the export-oriented part of its economy, could be rendered in the doldrums.